in the book that we're using for this series, The Meaning of Marriage by Tim Keller, he begins the book, as we started 2 weeks ago, with these words: marriage is glorious, sometimes it lasts, and hard, sometimes it hurts instead. It really is both. You know, we've had both of those in 32 years of marriage.
I was thinking for every single married couple out there, you relate to that. It's wonderful and it's really hard.
And I even think if you're not married, same thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
you still have highs and
Yeah.
real lows.
And we really experienced that this summer. Dave and I had a real busy year last year, so we thought we need a little vacation. Went to Manhattan, just the two of us on this little mini vacation, and we had a blast.
It was glorious.
It was glorious. I remember looking at him thinking, "You're my best friend."
Yeah, we shared this at Orion the first week of the series, and I remember thinking in New York we had great fun, great food, great shows, and
No.
great sex. I thought it was, anyway. You didn't?
I was just saying,
Anyway, it was sort of glorious.
You don't need to say all that, but yeah, it was glorious.
And then the day before we start the series, a couple weeks ago, we're driving a rental car back to Chicago O'Hare Airport from my youngest son Cody's college football game, and we get in an epic fight.
We had spent
Epic.
another day together, just the two of us, and I just looked at Dave and thought, actually, I said it. You have been a jerk to me the entire day.
Yeah.
It
I
was-
mean, you didn't just say it, sort of said it loud, how harsh I'd been. I mean, I actually thought it was a great day. I had no idea.
I know.
And you're calling me a jerk.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I just thought, I can't stand him right now. He's been mean, short. He's made me feel stupid the entire day. And it finally came to the point where he gave me this look like, he rolled his eyes like you were so stupid. And I couldn't stand it. Like, I'm sick of this.
And I got to tell you, have you ever been here? It was so bad in the car going back to the airport. We're both supposed to speak the next morning at Orion campus to start this marriage series. And I literally thought, she will not get up there tomorrow with me. In fact, she's going to sit in the front row and say, yeah, why don't you just live it once, preacher boy?
And poor Orion, we were up the next day at the campus at Orion, and we were kind of still working things out that morning.
Yeah, we've worked it out, right?
You have.
Yeah, I think so. And shout out to Orion, by the way, and Troy, and Clinton, and Birmingham, and even Orlando. I wish I was down there right now. But
that's marriage,
that
isn't
is
it?
marriage.
It's glorious, and yet it's really hard.
And so today, in week 3 of this series, we want to look at what Keller calls in the book the essence of marriage. In other words, what kind of relationship did God design marriage to be? And it's really interesting. We're shooting this video in the chapel, where I bet you I've done over 100 weddings as the officiating minister in this room. It's a beautiful room. Some of you got married here. And the amazing thing about this room is not only do weddings happen here, but I usually sign a marriage license somewhere in this room, either before or after the ceremony. And that's what today's called, the piece of paper. It's a legal document that says you're married. And so many people think, I don't need a piece of paper to be in love. And they're right, you don't really need a piece of paper, but they're sort of defining, as Keller says in the book, sort of defining love as this feeling or attraction or chemistry that a piece of paper, sometimes you think it will sort of diminish that. Yet God's perspective on relationships, especially the marriage relationship, has a lot to do with that piece of paper, because the piece of paper is a representation of a covenant. That is a relationship that God calls marriage.
And in the book, Keller talks about this, and he says it so well that we just wanted to read part of this. So listen to this. But when the Bible speaks of love, it measures it primarily not by how much you want to receive, but how much you are willing to give of yourself to someone, how much you're willing to lose for the sake of this person, how much of your freedom you're willing to forsake, how much of your precious time, emotion, and resources are you willing to invest in this person. And for that, the marriage vow is not just helpful, but it is even a test. In so many cases, when one person says to another, I love you, but let's not ruin it by getting married, that person really means I don't love you enough to close off all of my options. I don't love you enough to give myself to you that thoroughly. To say I don't need a piece of paper to love you is basically to say my love for you has not reached the marriage level.
I mean,
Wow.
that's heavy stuff.
Really heavy.
And I think he's right, because Keller's perspective is really the Bible's perspective, which we've been saying in the series, sort of the owner's manual. If God invented marriage, what does he have to say? He says the vow, the promise, is a covenant. It's a binding obligation. The piece of paper represents that. It says, this is so important to me. I am willing to make a promise till death do us part that I'm going to love you forever. And his definition of their love, that we've been talking about in the series, is totally different. It isn't what I can get, it's what I can sacrificially give. So here's what we want to do today. Keller does such a good job of comparing a covenant relationship with something I think we know better in our culture, a consumer relationship. We live in a consumer era where we look at everything as what can I get out of this product or out of this relationship, and we bring that into relationships, we bring that into single relationships, and we especially bring that into marriage. Let me read you a definition of what Keller says in the book as a consumer relationship. He says, a consumer relationship lasts only as long as the vendor meets your needs at a cost that is acceptable to you. By the way, the two kids in a lemonade stand drama, that was exactly what we're trying to illustrate for you. It's exactly a consumer relationship. It lasts only as long as the vendor meets your needs at a cost that is acceptable to you. If another vendor delivers better services or the same services at a better cost, you have no obligation to stay in a relationship to the original vendor. In a consumer relationship, the individual's needs are more important than the relationship. And it's really the way we do relationships in our country, yet it isn't the way we do parent-child relationships. That's more of a covenant.
That is exactly a picture of a covenant relationship. Because when you have a baby, you get, as a mother and father, you pour everything into this child. And they give you nothing back. All they do is poop and whine and eat. They give you nothing back. But you love this child no matter what. And that's true even as they get older. But that's a picture of a covenant relationship? However, in a marriage, if we don't get what we want out of the relationship, we oftentimes bail and feel like we have a right to get out because they haven't met our need.
Yeah, and I mean, it isn't literally true, but I'm sure you've thought many times, all I ever do in our relationship is poop, eat, and whine like a baby, right?
Sometimes.
I mean, it's somewhat similar, but obviously, if you would do that as a parent, our society would put you in jail. If you just walk away, it's a covenant relationship. No matter what you get back, you are going to stay in that relationship. Consumer relationship is the opposite, and often in our country, in marriage, we don't do that. God's perspective is this is a covenant. And actually, the Bible is full of covenants. Horizontal, human, man to man, and vertical, God to man. And you look at the marriage relationship, the way God designed it. This isn't popular, but this is God's original design, was a vertical and a horizontal relationship. I'll take you back to a text that we use in week 1 of this series, Genesis 2, the book at the very beginning, the first wedding in the Bible, Adam and Eve. God says this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. In that one ceremony, God says, here's what's going on. There's a relationship between me, establishing a covenant with you, Adam and Eve, and then there's a covenant between the two of you horizontally that reflects the covenant between God and man. And so it's this amazing picture of a glued together relationship. The literal word in the Hebrew there is the word cleave, that you should cleave, be united to, means to cleave to one another. It means to be glued to, it means to be stuck together.
Okay, let me ask you this though. Let's say somebody gets married and they don't even believe in God, or you get married at the justice of the peace and not with a pastor. Does that still mean it's a covenant? Is it any different?
You're not supposed to ask me questions I'm not prepared to answer. Are you kidding me? You're really going to ask me that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are like, oh,
yeah, and I would say this. In God's eyes, any couple that gets married is establishing a covenant. Often we don't understand it. One of the reasons we're doing this series and talking about this today is so that we would understand this. Because even the elements in a wedding, am I cutting you off? Don't ask another question. Even the elements in a wedding are all based on the covenant.
Well, I was going to say, God created it, and so whether we believe in God or not, he is there.
Yeah.
They may not think he's there, but he's there.
And many people sit at a wedding, don't even know why these elements are in a wedding. As I've stood in this stage and done many weddings, these are all elements in weddings because it's a visual of the covenant. Think of this. Here's a question that I will ask a couple standing right there on the stage. Will you have this woman to be your wife? And will you make your promise to her in all love and honor, in all duty and service, in all faith and tenderness, to live with her and to cherish her according to the ordinance of God in the holy bond of marriage? Now, guess what that couple will do? They will say, I do or I will, and they're not talking to each other. They're not even looking at each other.
Yeah.
They're looking at me. They're looking at the minister. You know what they're doing? They're establishing a vertical covenant. They're answering God on this. And it's sort of like we're going to establish a vertical covenant before we establish a horizontal covenant. And then we go to the vows, and they will say something like this. I take you. I sort of want to say this to you right now. I take you to be my lawful and wedded husband and wife. I do promise and covenant before God and these witnesses to be your loving and faithful wife, husband, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish as long as we both shall live.
And those are heavy. Those are weighty words. And I feel like when Dave and I made those committed to each other and spoke those vows to one another, I didn't even really know him yet. I knew who I was marrying that day, but that Dave is very different from the Dave
So
that
much
he is
better,
today.
so much better.
And I was thinking about that. I thought, I am so different. I wrote down here, like, will you love me when I'm different? That's what I should have asked you. Will you love me when I'm the fun Ann, when I'm the
Yes.
sensual Ann,
Yes.
when I'm the hormonal Ann?
No.
I mean it like all those things when you have a baby and you're like, nothing Ann, I have no life Ann. Will you love all those different Anns? And the same with you, like, will I love you when you're driven, Dave, when you're traveling, Dave? Because when we stand...
When I'm bald, Dave, you didn't see that coming, did you?
But when we stand there, we don't really know that person. So the vow is to God saying, whatever comes, whoever this person becomes, will I still love you? And it's a promise to the future, not just for this day.
Yeah, and I honestly believe that the vow moment in a wedding ceremony is the most powerful moment in the day. I mean, it's hard to say it's more powerful than that bride coming down the aisle, but I can remember standing right there several years ago when my middle son, Austin, and Kendall got married, and I was the dad, but also the pastor, and CJ and Robin got married the next year right here. Cody, our other son, was in the wedding party. I mean, you talk about a powerful moment
It's
to
weighty.
witness,
Yeah.
not just as a pastor, but as a father, and Ann sitting there, right there in that seat.
It's
I'll
holy.
never forget. I can't believe I'm standing here. I, Austin,
I, Austin,
take you, Kendall,
take you, Kendall,
to be my wife,
to be my wife,
to have and to hold from this day forward,
to have and to hold from this day forward,
for better, for worse,
for better, for worse,
for richer, for poorer,
for richer or poor,
in sickness and in health.
in sickness and in health.
I promise to love and respect you all the days of my life,
I promise to love and respect you all the days of my life,
and I will try in every way to be worthy of your love.
and I will try in every way to be worthy of your love.
Okay, Kendall. I, Kendall,
I, Kendall,
take you, Austin,
take you, Austin,
to be my husband,
to be my husband,
to have and to hold from this day forward,
to have and to hold from this day forward,
for better, for worse,
for better, for worse,
for richer, for poorer,
for richer, for poor,
in sickness and in health.
in sickness and in health.
I promise to love and respect you all the days of my
I
life,
promise to love and respect you all the days of my life,
and I will try in every way to be worthy of your love.
and I'll try in every way to be worthy of your love.
And so here's what I want to do for the rest of our time is really look at this covenant concept that's really God's idea and give you three sort of truths about a covenant. And I think we can do this hopefully briefly because again, go out and get the book and buy it and read it. Singles, this is some of the best stuff you'll ever get on marriage. So I've sort of put it in my own words, and they all start with the letter A, but basically it goes like this. A covenant vow is an anchor. A covenant vow is an anchor. It's a promise that anchors us to our commitments, and we need that anchor because tough times will come. Times will come where we'll want to bail on that commitment, and the covenant, the promise, it isn't just a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper that says, no, this is a vow you made before God to your spouse and with family and friends that say, we're going to help you do that. Couples that live together don't do this because there's not a vow to that. And so when something doesn't work, the consumer relationship kicks in, they're out. They're going to bail because Why would they say? But a vow before God, before your spouse, before family and friends is a heavy deal that becomes an anchor that says, I am not going anywhere.
And hopefully that vow, when it's in your mind and you realize what it is, it keeps you from drifting away. It keeps you grounded.
I love what Keller said in the book. He said, in promising and stating your vow, you limit your options now in order to have wonderful, fuller options later. You curb your freedom now so that you can be free to be there in the future for the people who trust you. And he quotes Lewis Smedes, one of my favorite authors. He says this, in a vow, you have created a small sanctuary of trust within the jungle of unpredictability. That is so true. I can remember, I've shared this here before, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, but being in a Dallas airport on a layover waiting for a flight, and a woman about my age, attractive blonde, sat down beside me. She turns to me and says, so where are you going?
You always have to share this illustration.
No, I don't. Okay, I won't.
No, I'm just kidding. Keep going. Go ahead.
Well, here's what happens. When she asked me where I was going, I looked over at her, grabbed my briefcase, and said, to the bathroom, and I ran. Literally ran as fast as I could to the bathroom, and went in the men's room, went in a stall, and just sat there. And the only reason I ran is because I love her, and I made a vow to her to be faithful till death do us part. Was I thinking of having an affair? No. But I didn't want to even entertain a conversation with a woman I didn't know.
That's right. You
that
are
seemed
the
to be
man.
coming on to me.
Yes, you were the man.
Whatever.
There we go.
It was
really.
just, it's an illustration for me of an anchor.
Yeah.
The vow, the promise, the obligation, even
And I will
the
say
piece of
this,
paper.
Dave would, I don't meet his needs all the time, and none of us meet each other's needs all the time. That's where the God part is so huge, that I can trust not him, but I trust Dave's walk with God, because I know he's a man of integrity because of the horizontal, which is huge for me, and it brings me to such security. One of the other things that Keller said in here, I feel like this is one of the best parts of the book.
Is this under the action? Second point. A
Okay.
covenant is an anchor. This illustrates a covenant is about action. It's not feelings of love as much as it is sacrificial action of love. And what Keller says here, in fact, I made Cody, he was sitting in the kitchen the last summer when I was reading, I said, Cody, you got to read this. Every single man and woman needs to hear what Keller says here.
So listen to this really closely. When you first fall in love, you think that you love...
Hey, one other thing.
What?
We need to take our offering right now. I forgot, because we're going to end the day in communion, which is going to be an
Yeah.
awesome moment for us. We want to take the offering right now. So while Ann reads this, I want you to listen to that. But if you're a visitor, let it pass. And if this is your home, I encourage you to give. But listen as you write your check for $100,000. Kidding. But no, listen as Ann reads this. But I also want to make this a worship moment where we give to God.
Can I read it now?
You can read it now.
When you first fall in love, you think that you love the person, but you don't really. You can't even know who the person is right away. That takes years. You actually love your idea of the person, and that is always at first one-dimensional and somewhat mistaken. Romantic flings are so intoxicatingly largely because that person is actually in love with a fantasy rather than a real human being. And I would say this. I would say many times we as women are in love with the fantasy of marriage. We're in love with the fantasy of what our life will look like. And so many times when we get married, we're let down.
Really?
But
So
not,
good to hear.
not only do you not know the other person, but the other person doesn't even really know you. You've put on your best face, often quite literally. There is an emotional high that comes to us when someone thinks we are so wonderful and beautiful. And that is part of what fuels the early passion and electricity of falling in love. But the problem is the person doesn't really know you and therefore doesn't really love you. That's kind of depressing.
Yeah.
Not yet, at least. When over the years someone has seen you at your worst and knows you with all your strengths and flaws, yet commits him or herself to you wholly, it is a consummate experience. To be loved but not known is comforting, but it's superficial.
Yeah, read this really slow. This
Okay.
is so good.
To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. Do you hear that? But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything else.
And I do think that, one of the reasons I wanted Cody or any single to hear that is not taught by the culture.
No.
There's sort of this fantasy that it'll be this amazing, wonderful, beautiful, intimate, sexual chemistry,
And it can
attraction.
be.
And all that's part of it.
It is true at
But
times.
that fades at times. And when it does, if you don't know the truth, you think, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with our marriage. There's something
Right.
wrong with this person. I married the wrong person. But when you know going in, I don't really even know this person. But over years and time, we're going to get to see and know and
Right.
love each other. And as Keller said, speak the truth and love at the same time. And we sort of have this fantasy. In fact, that you fall in love and it's this euphoric feeling. At Orion on the first week, somebody asked us through the questions that we text in, how will I know when I fall in love? And here was my answer. Nobody falls in love anymore than you fall into a mortgage. It's really true. You don't fall in love any more than you fall in. I mean, you fall in love with a house, but then you have to look at what it's going to cost and what monthly payments are going to be and how much work you're going to have to do. That's much like the relationship. You make a choice then to say that house is worth this kind of sacrificial action so that I can be an owner of that house. It's the same thing in love. It's like it isn't just heart and feeling. It's mind. It's a choice to love. I mean, I never thought going into marriage that love was what I would give a way to love you rather than what I would receive.
Yes,
and
that's what I
biblical
was gonna
love
say.
is sacrificial.
And we live in such a disposable society where we don't fix anything. We just throw everything away. Think about electronics. We just throw it all away and get something new. Even I was thinking about our furniture. When we got married, we redid all of our furniture.
Stripped it, refinished it,
Yeah.
stained
Now
it.
we would never do that. We throw it away, get something new. And marriage, we think, is just like that. I don't like this. I don't like you. It's not working. I'm out. I'm going to get something new.
You know, it's interesting that Paul, back in the classic marriage passages that we've been looking at in Ephesians 5, in verse 28, he says this to husbands. He says, husbands ought to love their wives. Earlier, he said they should love their wives as Christ loved the church. Now, what's Paul talking about? An emotion? This is a command here. You can't command an emotion. You can only command an action. So what's he commanding husbands? And by the way, wives to respond in the same way. He's commanding an action of sacrificial love. Often, I have not felt like loving you. As wonderful as you are, and I know you haven't felt like loving
Right.
me, and I'm the most amazing husband on the planet. Kidding. Yeah, obviously,
Right.
it's an act. It doesn't
even
often
when,
have feelings.
Yeah, when we were in our fight on the way to the
You're
airport,
going to bring that up again?
I mean, I know that I was mad at Dave, but I also know I love him and I'm committed to him. And so I'll act the way I should, not because he deserves it, but because God is telling me to.
So what do you do? I'm going to ask you a question.
no.
She never gets this. So what do you do when the feelings of love are gone in your marriage, in a relationship?
You act out what you should. You act lovingly, even though you don't feel it, this is where last week comes into play. And if you didn't come to church last week or watch it, you should
Yeah.
watch it because it's the power of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
I could never do that in and of myself. I'm not that nice. But God can empower us as we sit before Him and learn and grow.
And I actually feel like even in our fight a couple weeks ago, and by the way, that's not the only one we had this year. It happens often. You were so hurt and disappointed in me again, and I couldn't believe again I treated her that way. But yet, as I look back on it, you still loved me. You still were tender after you called
Was
me a
I?
jerk. You still were graceful, forgiving. You did the actions of love despite your feelings. And I think one of the things that happens, and Keller even gets into this in the book, is when you do the actions of love, the feelings come later.
Yes.
Not always
That's
immediately,
huge.
but they do follow. We tend to want to wait for the feeling and then we'll act out of it. That's the consumer relationship again.
Right, and I was going to say, and you don't act lovingly because your spouse deserves it. Because that's the hard part. Many times we act lovingly because we think they deserve it. This means you act lovingly even when they don't deserve it and when they won't give you something back. Because more often than not, if they aren't loving back to us, then we'll just check out.
Yeah. All right, so let me give you one last thought on covenant. And there's so many others, but we're just giving you three. We said it's an anchor. A covenant vow is an anchor. We said a covenant vow is about action, not feeling. And then the last one, the other A word would be this. A covenant is about adversity. I mean, it doesn't sound very sexy, but when you make a vow, when you make a promise, it's with the belief that this vow will be challenged and adversity is coming. We say in the vow, for richer, for poorer. 32 years, we've experienced more poorer than richer.
Yes.
For sickness and in health.
Yeah.
I mean, I just went through back surgery. You've had cancer scares. I had lung cancer scare. For better or worse, we went through an 0-16 season. Anyway, forget that. But, I mean, all of those adversities coming. It's going to come. And don't forget something we said in week 1 that Keller quotes in the book, a statistic that says, I put it back in the notes, 2/3 of unhappy marriages become happy within 5 years if people stay married and don't get divorced. It's an amazing statistic. It's like, in the middle of adversity, hold on to that anchor of your vow, even though you don't feel like it and you want to bail because everything in you says, I'm out. Hang on, fight. And 2/3 of couples will say, I'm glad we fought through that. It took at least 5 years, but we're at a place now where we would actually classify our marriage as happy, when 5 years ago we would have said, I'm ready to leave and be unhappy. That's the vow keeping you through adversity. And adversity is a part of every single relationship.
Well, let's give a word to people that have gone through like adversity to the point where they don't even know, like, should we stay together? So what would you say to someone that's like, I don't even know if I can stay here a second longer. What should I do?
I would first of all say a lot of people feel what you're feeling. It isn't rare. It's common. I mean, we felt that. Our 10-year anniversary, you were ready to
Right.
leave. One of the most important things I would say to you is talk to somebody that can give you godly counsel. I mean, who you talk to really matters, and you can talk to people who say, get out of there. You can talk to somebody who says, now let's step back and give a divine perspective on this. I'm not going to say they're going to say you have to stay, but I'm going to say there may be a separation needed for a time, but we have marriage mentors who'll be standing at the front of this stage at every campus
That have been trained.
and they love you. They love family and marriage, and they want to help you, and they will give you godly wisdom.
Right.
Talk to them. Pray with them.
Because we know that each person, each relationship is very complicated. So we would really strongly suggest that you talk to a counselor, a biblical counselor, or one of our mentors that have been trained.
Yeah, I think it'd be the right move.
Yeah.
Maybe even today, don't leave today until you talk to somebody. Let me close this way. As you think about the covenant, the image that Keller brings up and that resonates so much with us is the cross. I mean, picture the cross at Calvary and God hanging on that cross, Jesus Christ on that cross. What's going through his mind as he looks at us, mankind that put him there? Is he feeling, it's so wonderful what you've done to me? I mean, he was in agony looking at men and women who had betrayed him and denied him, who had spit on him, had called him names. And he stayed on that cross knowing that I'm not looking at you because you're lovely, but I'm doing an act that will make you lovely. And the most powerful image for me is these two words: Jesus stayed. Jesus stayed on the cross. He could have bailed. He could have walked out. He could have said, I'm not doing this. God stayed. Why? Because he sacrificially loves you that much. You're sitting here today and you're thinking there's a sin you committed that God can't forgive. He stayed on the cross for that sin, for your life, for my life. I mean, it's a powerful visual of covenant love, the most extreme, supreme example ever in history.
And I would say it's our only hope, honestly. I know that people can have great marriages apart from God, but for us, he has been, him dying on the cross for us has given us life.
I want to close with a video of a man named Robert McQuilkin, who was at the time the president of Columbia Bible and Seminary, and his wife Muriel. They'd been married for decades, came down with Alzheimer's, and he had a very important decision to make about whether he would continue to be president or go home to take care of her, and he decided he needed to go home and take care of her. And we have the audio tape of him explaining that to the student body. And as you listen to a man talk about a vow, I want you to hear the voice of Jesus saying basically the same words to you.
I haven't in my life experienced easy decision-making on major decisions, but one of the simplest and clearest decisions I've had to make is this one, because circumstances dictated it. Muriel, now, in the last couple of months. Seems to be almost happy when with me, and almost never happy when not with me. In fact, she seems to feel trapped, becomes very fearful, sometimes almost terror. And when she can't get to me, there can be anger. She's in distress. But when I'm with her, she's happy and contented. And so I must be with her at all times. And you see, it's not only that I promised in sickness and in health, till death do us part, and I'm a man of my word. But as I have said, I don't know with this group, but I've said publicly, it's the only fair thing. She sacrificed for me for 40 years to make my life possible. So, if I cared for her for 40 years, I'd still be in debt. However, there's much more. It's not that I have to, it's that I get to. I love her very dearly, and you can tell it's not easy to talk about. She's a delight. It's a great honor to care for such a wonderful person.